Well, I come here to express my strong opposition to House Bill 5127, Reproductive Health Care Act. I'm familiar with this building in that when I was in college, I was a page here in the House of Representatives, and enjoyed that experience very, very much. So after my testimony, if you want me to get you water or a House bill, something, I'd be happy to do it to re-invoke my days of being a page. But I want to just express a preamble to my prepared remarks, considering some of the things that were said prior to my coming to this stand. And that is, one is that the Bible does express the condemnation of abortion in the sense, of course, that as it was said, "Thou shalt not kill," but also in a very poetic way, the Psalms express how God knitted us and knew us in our mother's womb as an indication of our humanity in the womb. And also, too, there's a document that was written before the Gospels were even written, and it's called the Didache. If you Google it, you'll see the Didache. And the Didache is a document that I said was written before Paul's letters, was written before the Gospels, and in this Didache, it's penned by the apostles themselves, the 12, and they condemn abortion specifically. They mention abortion and they condemn it. This is a document even before the Gospels were written. But also, too, to speak to the rabbis' concern about religion and politics in this issue. Some of you are aware that Justice Scalia's son is a priest, Paul Scalia. And I got to know him over the years. We were ordained around the same time. And Paul and I were talking about his father and how much I admired Justice Scalia. And he said, something my father always really despised was being called a pro-life justice. He didn't want to be known as a pro-life justice. He is a strict constructionist. And he looks at the Constitution the way that it's written, and it's not because he's a Catholic, it's not because he's pro-life, it's not because his son is a priest, but it's because of the way he interprets the Constitution. And so this is not a matter of Catholics imposing their opinion on others, but it's a matter of looking at the Constitution in a way in which Scalia argued when he was a justice on the court, God rest his soul. So I want to talk a little bit this evening about a pro-life story of how I came to be as a person and then as a priest. It's a pro-life story that begins with my ancestry. Many of us are looking at our ancestry and we're 23andMe and these other ways in which we can learn about who we are. I decided to look at my ancestry, and I found that my great-great-grandmother in Acre, Calabria, was a woman who was in a crisis pregnancy, who abandoned her baby with a woman in a turnstile. She was a collector of rents in Calabria, and she put the baby in a turnstile, and she turned it around, and she walked away. So she wanted to be anonymous. But she had the baby, and she felt that this was important for her to bring this baby into life, but to give it to somebody who she knew would give it to somebody who would care for it. So my great-grandfather was brought to the municipal building when he was a couple of days old, sent to an orphanage in Cosenza, and then when he was a teenager came back to Calabria, married a woman, and them and their 5 children legally immigrated to the United States, to the Federal Hill area of Providence. And they, he and one of these children was my grandfather. He married my grandmother, and my grandmother's last son was my father. And the doctor told the midwife that my father was going to be born a stillborn. This was in 1934. He couldn't hear a heartbeat, and he said, "You're going to give birth to this child, but this child is going to be a stillborn." So the midwife came over. My father was born very much alive. And this was an indication that, you know, how precious human life is and how God has a plan. And then when my mother was pregnant with me, my father was in the hospital, and my mother was very nervous because she just found out she was pregnant. She had 2 girls at home, and she was speaking to a woman who was a friend of hers at the time. This was in 1965, and she said, I'm really nervous. I have to go home. I have to go to the hospital. I have to tell my husband that I'm pregnant, and this is going to be difficult because he's in the hospital. We have 2 girls at home, and we economically we weren't very rich. So the woman said, you can have an abortion. And my mother said she was just shocked when she heard that word, and she said she never considered it. But there was somebody that had recommended when my mother was pregnant with me that I should be aborted. And if my mother took this woman's advice, I wouldn't be here, and there wouldn't be a vocation to the priesthood. So this is a very personal matter, and it's a matter of children needing to be protected in the womb because they are a life and because they are a human being. And when we look at our journeys of how we got here, it's a real miracle. And our life began at conception because we didn't exist before conception, and then we began to exist after conception, and we began to grow in the womb, and then we began to grow outside our mother's body, but we were a life because we didn't exist before conception. So thank you very much for listening to my ancestry and my story about my pro-life ancestry and how great decisions were made. And because of a pro-life environment of Italy in the 19th century and America in the mid-60s, when abortion in both places was illegal, and it was a matter of understanding the importance of respecting life in the womb. Thank you.
Thank you.